When you get on his bad side, your number is up. With a tagline like that, it was clear that License to Kill wasn't going to be your typical run-of-the-mill James Bond film. Released in 1989, this darker and very brutal Bond film sees Bond go rogue from his position as a British secret agent and sets out on revenge after his friend Felix Leiter was targeted by a powerful drug lord. Timothy Dalton returns for his second and final performance as 007, as he continues to humanize Bond and remind us all that James Bond is a brutal killer, while returning many elements to the character from the original Ian Fleming novels, where he must track down Franz Sanchez, my favourite ever James Bond villain, played superbly by Robert Davi, a Bond villain who doesn't hang out in high-tech lairs with dreams of taking over the world, but one whose main goal is loyalty from those he associates himself with, where Bond makes it his mission to destroy Sanchez's drug empire. Okay, this is no joke, one badass Bond film. I mean, this goes balls to the wall with how hardcore and violent it is. This is definitely a harder hitting Bond film, and I think that's something that the franchise needed after the days of Roger Moore, what with seeing James Bond dressing up as a clown and swinging on vines like Tarzan. License to Kill is no joke my favourite Bond film. So with that, 10 amazing facts about License to Kill. The Bond film that packs a punch. Number 10. The story was originally going to be set in China. It was always intended for License to Kill to be a serious James Bond film, to accommodate for Timothy Dalton's more serious take on the character, and producer Michael G. Wilson and frequent Bond scriptwriter Richard Maybaum had written a script which would see Bond travel to China to take on a powerful drug ring, where there was even going to be a chase scene on the Great Wall of China, and locations were even being scouted. However, just before License to Kill went into production, The Last Emperor came out, and it was felt that the novelty of showing beautiful Chinese landscapes were now redundant thanks to The Last Emperor. So it was then decided to give License to Kill a more tropical feel, and base the movie in South America and the Florida Key West. Which is why License to Kill feels less Cold War spy thriller and more Miami Vice. Number 9. None of License to Kill was filmed in the UK. Although the Bond films are a film series well known for being filmed all around the world at many stunning locations, each movie still had huge chunks filmed in England, particularly interior shots, which were often filmed at Pinewood Studios. However, License to Kill is the first Bond film to have none of its filming whatsoever to be filmed in the UK. Instead, the movie was mainly filmed in Mexico City, which doubled for the fictional South American city of Isthmus, with most of the filming taking place at Churubusco Studios in Mexico, as well as some filming at Florida Key West. The reason none of the film was filmed on British shores is because of some act that passed at the time, meaning if the production company had filmed in the UK, it would have been heavily taxed. A similar thing happened 10 years earlier with Moonraker, with most of that movie being filmed in France, but unlike License to Kill, it still had some of its filming take place at Pinewood Studios. Number 8. Title change. License to Kill is the first Bond film to use a title that isn't directly taken from an Ian Fleming story, be that a novel or short story. However, naming the movie was quite difficult, as originally the movie was called License Revoked, as a reference to Bond's license to kill being suspended in the movie, and some of the early artwork for the movie clearly shows it being called License Revoked. However, it was felt that the word revoked wasn't a common word used in America, which may cause some confusion, so the title was changed to License to Kill. However, this caused more problems, as they didn't know how the word license should be spelt, as the British spells it with 2 C's, whereas the US spells it with 1 C and an S. But it was decided to keep the British spelling, as James Bond is a British institution. Number 7. Story influences. License to Kill isn't based on any Ian Fleming story per se, which isn't out of the ordinary, as by this stage in the franchise most of the movies deviated from Fleming's stories, despite using his titles. However, elements of Fleming's stories are in License to Kill. For example, the sleazy and often drunk character Milton Crest is an Ian Fleming creation, from the James Bond short story The Hildebrand Rarity, which is a short story from the book For Your Eyes Only. And the character Sanchez is very similar to the villain Mr. Big from the Live and Let Die book. And the scene of Felix Leiter getting fed to a shark is also from the pages of Live and Let Die. In addition to that, producer Michael G. Wilson states that the story of License to Kill is also influenced by the samurai Yojimbo films, in that the assassin who is out to take down his enemy doesn't attack his opponents physically, but rather makes the main villain lose trust in those who run his empire, which leads to his demise. And making Sanchez lose trust in his henchmen by Bond is a huge subplot in License to Kill, as Bond knows that his weakness is loyalty and uses it to strike. Also, the story took inspiration from modern-day headlines of the time, with the focus revolving around a powerful drug lord, something that the film got a bit of criticism for at the time. Also, Bond was very much a British story, rooted in the Cold War. Once again, I don't think people knew how to take this whole Lethal Weapon and Miami Vice approach. Number 6, the gruesome Bond film. Okay, no doubt about it, License to Kill is one brutal James Bond movie. The blood and violence really gets turned up in this entry. During the Roger Moore era, the violence felt safe. It had a disco comic book vibe going on. However, in License to Kill, we literally see people get destroyed and ripped apart, as we see characters get mauled by sharks, diced up, and explode. Yeah, License to Kill might just be the most blood-soaked of all the James Bond films. This led to the movie to get a PG-13 rating in America, although let's face it, if it came out now, it would be a hard R, as well as getting a Certificate 15 in the UK and an M15 rating here in Australia. It is believed that License to Kill's higher rating led to it not performing as well in the box office, as many fans of the series were shocked with its more sadistic approach. In fact, when the movie was released on home media in the UK, it had to have some of its more violent scenes cut out, which wouldn't be restored until 2006. Number 5, the music of License to Kill. Frequent Bond composer John Barry was set to return and score License to Kill, but he couldn't due to having throat surgery, and sadly he never returned to the Bond films, making the previous entry, The Living Daylights, his final Bond film that he would compose. So the movie's production turned to Michael Kamen, who at that stage was the go-to composer of action movies, having composed Lethal Weapon and Die Hard, and he puts his own spin on the Bond theme and updates the sound while returning the guitar pitch for the main theme, which was a welcomed comeback. He also gives the score a fresh tropical sound which blends with the movie's atmosphere. Originally, Eric Clapton was asked to provide a song for License to Kill, but the song that he provided was rejected. So instead, the production went with Gladys Knight, who, like Bond, at that stage was a pop cultural veteran, as opposed to using an in-the-moment pop group of the time, like the previous Bond films had done, aka Duran Duran and a-ha. The License to Kill song is slick and cool and even uses traces of the Goldfinger horn line, of which royalties had to be paid because of that. Not to mention the fact that Gladys Knight had issues with the song's subject matter and lyrics due to religious reasons, but thankfully she sung her heart out and gave us one truly awesome performance. Number 4, the haunted location. Over the years, James Bond has had to battle terrorists, murderers, and criminals. However, while making License to Kill, Bond was met with more supernatural forces. The movie's epic truck chase climax was filmed on a highway near Mexicali. The highway had been closed down due to safety reasons, as there were many stories of freak accidents happening on the location. And after several dodgy accidents took place while filming the truck scene, the License to Kill crew started to generally believe that the location was cursed. There are even stories of members of the crew seeing ghostly apparitions at the location, and even stories of the truck starting up and driving around by themselves. But the cherry on top of the cake, or rather the olive in the martini, is a still shot of the tanker explosion at the end of the film, which features what looks like a hand complete with fingers coming out of the flames, which led the crew going through the footage of the explosion carefully, frame by frame, to which they couldn't find this menacing hand of fire. Pretty spooky, huh? So, was the location haunted, or did a photo editor with a sense of humour Photoshop that hand in the picture? Well, I don't know, but what I do know is that the chase sequence looks great in the film, and that's all that matters really. Number 3, it marked many departures in the series. To me, License to Kill is the last Bond film in the classic Bond series, and marks the end of so many traits that have been part of the series since the start, until GoldenEye would come out 6 years later with a shiny new revamp. It was the last Bond film to be produced by Albert R. Broccoli, who had been producing the Bond films since Dr. No. Maurice Binder, who had designed the gun barrel logos and title sequences, who also worked on the franchise since Dr. No, shortly died after License to Kill, also making it his last Bond film. It was the last Bond film to use the services of director John Glenn, with License to Kill being his 5th and final Bond film. And in addition to that, Glenn has actually been involved in the series ever since On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It was the last one to feature Timothy Dalton as Bond, as afterwards the series was put on hiatus due to legal issues, and by the time the franchise got back on track, Dalton had lost interest in the part. Both Robert Brown, who played M, and Caroline Bliss, who played Moneypenny, would be replaced in the next movie. And the whole concept of Bond going rogue was also something of a departure. Although since License to Kill we have seen Bond go rogue several times, back in 1989 it felt like such a radical change to the character. And of course, after License to Kill came out, the Cold War ended, which made many people think that Bond was now over, as Bond was a foundation built on the Cold War. But thankfully, GoldenEye came out after a 6-year break, feeling fresh and rejuvenated, and proved that there is still plenty of life in this franchise. Number 2, movie poster fiasco. Bond posters have always used awesome artwork, promising adventure and excitement. And some of the concept poster designs for License to Kill had some interesting ideas, such as focusing on the iguana and a fight with Sanchez on top of a truck. However, the poster they went with was, well, weird. For a start, this poster isn't even visually pleasing. It's dull and just looks like a dodgy Photoshop job, as it features this cutout of Bond who seems to be levitating. Yeah, look at this, he's floating in thin air, standing behind a giant head on fire, which I think is supposed to be Sanchez, even though it doesn't look a thing like Robert Davi, with an awkward square photo of the Bond girls just thrown in there for good measure, making an already unorganized poster look even more unorganized. It's even been suggested that this not so flattering poster also led to poor marketing and thus not up to par box office performance. Another poster was put together which admittedly does look a lot better and captures the feel of the movie, but by the time it came out, it was too little too late. Look, it almost pains me to say this, because I generally tend to love the James Bond posters, just not this original License to Kill one. However, after License to Kill, the posters would go back to being awesome again, with the exception of Spectre. Man, that poster was trash. And before we get to number 1, here are some bonus facts. Bonus number 1, returning Felix Leiter. Before Jeffrey Wright, David Hedison was the only actor to appear as Felix Leiter in more than one Bond film. He previously played the role in 1973's Live and Let Die. Originally, it was considered to have the very first Leiter, Jack Lord, return in the role to give the character's downfall more weight. But after the producers saw Hedison was still in pretty good shape, they decided to go with him instead. Movie buffs would recognise Hedison as the original Fly from the 1958 original The Fly. Bonus number 2, video game. There was a License to Kill home computer game, which came out as a tie-in for the movie, which basically follows the general plot of the film. You're Bond and you must track down Sanchez for what he did to Leiter, although the game explains that he actually killed Leiter. Wow, that's dark. So it's basically a chase game seen from a bird's eye view perspective. The weird thing about seeing the License to Kill video game is knowing that the next Bond film would produce the GoldenEye game, which would go on to become one of the greatest video games of all time. Well, I guess we have to start somewhere. Bonus number 3, comic book. Both DC and Marvel had a go at publishing comic book versions of Bond movies. However, for License to Kill, Eclipse Comics had a go at retelling Bond for the printed page for a hardback graphic novel. And the comic panels themselves are fine, and it does follow the movie faithfully, even if some of the colour schemes are dull. I mean, look at the wedding tuxedos, I don't remember them being sky white. Incidentally, apparently Bond couldn't resemble Timothy Dalton, as Dalton didn't give permission for his likeness to be used, but I don't know, that looks pretty Dalton-esque if you ask me. Number 1, box office woes. The box office takings of License to Kill was low. Well, by Bond standards at least, as the movie made $156 million at the box office, as opposed to the previous Bond movie, The Living Daylights, which made $191 million, and the next entry, GoldenEye, which made $355 million. So why were the License to Kill takings so low? Well, there are a few factors already mentioned, including the darker, grittier approach. I mean, keep in mind the franchise had only just finished with Roger Moore at this stage, and probably weren't ready for this new, scary, violent James Bond world. Also that year, there was stiff competition in the box office, with the likes of Lethal Weapon 2, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Back to the Future 2, Ghostbusters 2, and more importantly, Batman, which was just dominating the box office at the time. But despite this, in recent years people have gone back to License to Kill and watched it again, and have agreed that it's actually a great Bond film, and that it was just underrated for its time. It's kind of like on Her Majesty's Secret Service, in that when both movies came out, they were shrugged off as just being not very good Bond films, but as the years go by, people can see the true genius in both movies. Without a doubt, License to Kill was a Bond film ahead of its time. It took risks and didn't want to be another run-of-the-mill Bond film, and was taking the franchise into new and exciting territories. And I think it's a shame that this dark James Bond world that director John Glenn and Timothy Dalton had created couldn't further be explored, as due to legal issues, it was stopped dead in its tracks. Only for a new take on the Bond legend to come into effect 6 years later with the Pierce Brosnan era. But regardless, we'll always have License to Kill. Anyway, I'm Minty, and why is it License to Kill, a near-perfect Bond movie, has to be let down with weird fish statues? Seriously, there is this terrifying fish mutant monstrosity that Bond wakes up to, and then the winking fish at the end. I don't get it. I mean, what's with this movie's strange fascination with fish statues? See ya!